She was just the janitor, quiet, invisible, overlooked until a Russian colonel spoke in code and she answered in perfect Russian. The room froze. The general stared at her, stunned, then asked, "How many languages do you speak?" She looked him in the eye. 9, she said. And when a hidden drone threatened the base, she dropped her mop and activated a shutdown protocol she wrote 2 decades ago. They thought she mopped floors. Turns out she was the last line of defense. Could this janitor's secret save them all? Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Travis Air Force Base woke up in a sheet of cold gray. The sky was iron. The flag barely moved. Boots struck the pavement in steady rhythm, echoing off steel hangers and concrete barriers. It was just another winter morning in Northern California. Pilots strode with purpose. Engineers shouted over hums of generators. The base pulsed with quiet readiness, and weaving silently through it all was a janitor, a woman in faded coveralls, pushing a mop bucket that squeaked every few steps. Her name was Marjorie Lane. Most didn't know that. To many, she was just ma'am when they bothered at all. She never wore makeup, never took breaks where others gathered. Her silver hair was pulled tight into a bun that didn't move even in wind. She was always early, always in the same wing, and always gone before taps. To the junior airmen, she was a ghost. Some called her mop specter behind her back. Others lowered their voices when she passed, for reasons they couldn't explain. Because while she never looked directly at anyone, there was something in her eyes, a stillness that unsettled, like she was listening for things no one else heard. She spent most of her hours in Wing B, where international operations and foreign logistics were processed. The signs read restricted, but Marjorie had clearance, the kind no one double-checked. She swept under satellite displays, around security checkpoints, past analysts who barely glanced her way. She moved like furniture, expected, ignored, until the news came. A NATO diplomatic delegation was arriving, a formal visit, handshake photos, protocol drills. But for Marjorie, only one name on that list mattered. Colonel Mail Rostov. The name hit her like frost on bone. Not because he was Russian, but because he was supposed to be dead. She didn't show it, of course. Just finished rinsing out the mop, wrung it dry, and went back to polishing the glass near command hall. But inside, something shifted. What hidden past lies beneath her silence? That night, she returned to her rented room, a one-bedroom unit behind a shuttered mechanic shop near Fairfield's old district. No photos, no clutter, no signs of who she'd been. She made a single cup of black coffee, sat in silence, then reached beneath the thin mattress and pulled out a wooden box. It was worn and unmarked, except for a single faded crest carved into the top. A feather quill crossed over a dagger, surrounded by 13 stars. She opened it slowly. Inside was a plastic badge, yellowed at the edges. It read CIA Linguistic Strategy Division, beneath it, a photo black and white, creased from decades, Berlin 1986. She was in uniform, eyes sharp, standing beside 3 men in trench coats whose faces were never filed. There was a folded document under the photo. Most of the ink had faded, but the clearance stamp was still visible. Alpha 6 top compartmentalized access. She held the photo longer than she meant to, then closed the lid and locked the box again. Whatever Rostov was doing here, it wasn't diplomacy. The next morning, the base was brighter. More movement. Extra MP patrols. Flags hung at full staff. The arrival ceremony was being prepared. White chairs lined the walkway. Generals practiced their speeches. Marjorie cleaned the conference room. She did it carefully, but not slowly. Every edge of every polished panel reflected her boots. Every wire casing noted. Every nameplate read twice. She noted that the interpreter assigned to the event was new, young, confident, and untested. She passed him once in the hall. He smiled, not unkindly, then turned back to his notes, unaware of the mistakes already in them. Around noon, the delegation arrived. Black SUVs rolled into the tarmac. Diplomatic flags fluttered. Marjorie stepped aside, holding her cart near the double doors. She kept her eyes low. She heard the footsteps before she saw them. Foreign accents, familiar cadences, polished shoes that hesitated slightly before crossing a threshold. Then Rostov, he was older, thicker around the middle, but the smile was still too still. And the eyes, they still scanned too much. He passed her, stopped just half a second too long. Their eyes met, and in that breath, she knew he remembered her. Not the name, but the voice. The face behind mirrored glass in Damascus. The one who had spoken perfect Farsi while wearing a Polish accent. Marjorie didn't blink, didn't react, just turned, pushed the cart, and walked. But her mind was already elsewhere. By late afternoon, the building buzzed with ceremony. Laptops flashed. Briefing packets exchanged hands. Foreign officers smiled tight smiles. General Gregory Holbrook stood tall at the entrance, shaking hands like a statesman. But none of them knew that the woman wiping down the water dispenser had once memorized Rostov's entire voice pattern to identify changes in emotional pitch during interrogation, that she had once disappeared, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too well, that she had once been a whisper behind the wall, the kind that ended operations before they started. Later that evening, Marjorie sat alone at the end of her shift. The corridor was empty. Only the hum of fluorescent lights remained. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out an old brass coin, one given to her by a Kurdish boy outside Mosul in '92. He had said thank you in 5 languages, and she had answered in 7, her fingers closed around the coin. Something was coming, and if no one else could see it, she would. Because sometimes the only person who hears danger is the one sweeping the floor beneath it. Could her forgotten skills stop an unseen threat? The following morning came without fanfare, but the air on base felt different, tighter, as if something had settled into the walls overnight and no one had the words to name it. Marjorie walked her route like always. Gray coveralls neat, cart-stocked, face unreadable. Today she was assigned to the East Wing Conference corridor. No one questioned it. It was written plainly on the maintenance log: cleanup rotation, building 17B, halls 3 through 5. Coincidence, perhaps? But Marjorie didn't believe in coincidences, especially not on the day Colonel Rostov was meeting behind closed doors with senior NATO officials. She moved quietly through the outer vestibule, spraying down surfaces no one would touch, sweeping corners no one would see. 2 MPs walked past her, laughing softly about something. They didn't even glance her way. That was good. That was the point. Beyond the frosted glass doors, she could hear voices already rising. One of them was General Holbrook's measured diplomatic. Another had the smooth drawn syllables of an Eastern European accent. Russian, to be precise. That one didn't need identification. She knew it like the lines of her own palm. She paused beside the vending machine near the conference wall, wiped it once slowly, then leaned just close enough to hear a phrase. That was all she needed. Colonel Rostov was speaking Russian as expected, but the words he chose weren't routine. He said something about storage rotations and electrical grid redundancies. On paper, that would sound harmless, but he used an old phrasing, a Cold War inflection from Soviet manuals long thought obsolete. And then the translator repeated it back incorrectly. The young interpreter across the room misread the context, swapped a single verb for another. A subtle mistake, maybe harmless. Unless you understood what was really being said. Marjorie froze in place. That phrasing paired with the timing wasn't an accident. It was a linguistic marker, a trigger phrase, one that told a listening agent that a signal had been embedded nearby and would activate during the next comm cycle. She had seen this before. Once in Tripoli, once in Prague, once in Berlin. She pulled her cart away from the vending machine and resumed her route. Eyes lowered, ears sharp. Whatever Rostov had come here to do, it had already begun, and no one else in that room had any idea. She turned into the next hallway. It was quiet. Too quiet, just outside the airfield operations control panel. She paused again. There was a flicker on the corner of the maintenance camera, barely a shimmer, like light bending in the wrong direction. To anyone else, it would have looked like heat distortion, but Marjorie had seen the signature before. She approached the window slowly, pretending to polish the inside glass. She tilted her head just enough to glance through the triple-pane surface. The angle was tight, but she caught it, something small hovering behind the exhaust fans of Hangar 4, perfectly still, almost invisible. A drone, not one of theirs. It had no tail signature, no sound trail, and its position, it was aimed directly at the classified R&D substation. She wiped once more, then turned away like nothing happened. Inside, her pulse was steady, but her mind was on fire. She needed confirmation. She needed access. But above all, she needed time. She returned her cart to the cleaning bay, clocked out. No one asked questions. No one noticed the thin sheet of data paper tucked beneath her glove. In the tiny storage closet she used as an unofficial break room, Marjorie opened an old military radio case mounted behind the locker shelf. It hadn't worked in years. That didn't matter. She didn't use it to transmit. She used it to scan frequencies, data bursts, command tones, and at 1447 it pinged a triple pulse, high band, military encoded, but not American. The signal was buried under weather reports. It was moving west. And worse, it was bouncing between relays across the base. She leaned back, eyes closed. They were already inside. Later that evening, while scrubbing the hallway outside the administrative wing, a sudden wave of memory overtook her. The tile under her hands blurred for a second, not from exhaustion. From 1987, she was back in Berlin in the cold wing of Station Echo. The mission had gone sideways. A code leak. Someone inside had sold names for silence. Her name had been one of them. They told her the extraction was still viable. They were wrong. She made it out, but only because she went off book, burned her own file, disappeared into the dark. No commendation, no trail. She became no one. Marjorie Lane wasn't her first name or her second. It was her last. She came back to the present with a breath, back to the floor, to the mop, to the threat sitting quietly in hangar 4 like a silent tooth ready to bite. She moved to the western corridor where diplomatic staff had gathered for evening updates. No one paid her any attention until Rostov exited the conference room. He stopped just outside the door, adjusted his coat, scanned the hallway casually until he saw her. For a moment, his face registered nothing. Then his gaze paused. Too long. Recognition blinked across his expression like a suppressed memory clawing its way forward. She met his eyes, held them, didn't smile, didn't blink. She stepped forward as if retrieving a trash bin, then past him. As she moved by, she leaned slightly, whispered low in Russian. Salad kak tuda, you still leave your men behind. Like that day. Rostov's body stiffened. He turned too late to stop her. She was already gone, past the elevator, around the corner, back into shadow behind him. The hallway buzzed with low conversation. Inside the conference room, the general's voice resumed, but Rostov didn't follow. He simply stood there staring after a woman who shouldn't have existed. His hands curled slightly, his jaw set. And deep in his eyes, there was something else now. Not confusion, not even fear. It was calculation. As if he just realized that whatever plan he'd come to execute was no longer one-sided. Marjorie returned to the janitor's closet, sat down on the crate she used as a bench, unrolled the sleeve of her coverall, revealing the edge of a tattoo faded, still there, a symbol, a quill, a dagger, 13 stars, barely visible. She traced it once with her thumb, then looked toward the door. It had begun, and this time she would finish it. Holbrook didn't like being interrupted. Not during classified briefings, not by contractors, and certainly not by a janitor with a clipboard and no rank. But when Marjorie Lane walked into his office at 0417, he didn't raise his voice, because something in her eyes told him this wasn't about floors. She closed the door gently. No hesitation, no dramatics, just silence. And then her voice, "Sir," she said, "I need 5 minutes." No recorders, no aides. He arched an eyebrow, leaned back in his chair. "What's this about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she placed 3 folded documents on his desk. Top sheet English, second Arabic, third Pashto. Each one highlighted in red ink, specific phrases that didn't match standard military translations. "You see these?" she asked calmly. "They're errors. All from the same source, same patterns, different languages." Holbrook frowned. "These are from yesterday's briefings. How did you even get these?" She looked at him evenly. I didn't. I heard them. Through the wall. While mopping, he started to speak, but she interrupted. And this, she added, pulling a slip of paper from her sleeve, is what those phrases actually meant. Not humanitarian codes, not logistical chatter. Their coordinates, hidden directives encoded through dialect drift. Holbrook leaned forward now. Something in his posture changed. And who exactly are you? Mississippi Lane. Marjorie didn't blink. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a badge. Old, faded, but marked with a clearance code no longer in circulation. Langley Embedded Linguistics Alpha 6, last act of 2005, officially retired, unofficially. I stayed close. Holbrook stared at the badge, then at her, then back at the papers, and for the first time in years he looked uncertain. You're saying we've been infiltrated? No, she said, I'm saying they're already inside. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he stood, pressed a code into the wall panel behind his desk. The lights dimmed. A thin red line traced the doorframe. Secure mode engaged. All right, he said. What do you need? It began without sirens, no flashing lights, no shouted commands, just quiet orders sent through secured lines, a silent lockdown protocol designed for threats no one could afford to name. Marjorie didn't wear her janitor's uniform anymore. She changed in the vault hallway into a faded black flight suit with no insignia. It still fit, almost like it never left her bones. She tied her hair back tighter, clipped a watch onto her wrist, a model discontinued in 2004. Its screen was cracked, but the interface still worked. She'd calibrated it herself. Holbrook handed her a slim black folder. Inside were aerial feeds, thermal overlays, and a heat signature hovering near Hangar 4. Too smooth, too controlled. Not American. It's Russian tech, she said. Old skeleton, modified optic. Holbrook nodded. We've tried to trace the signal. It's masked through 3 relays. Every time we reroute, it jumps. We can't shoot it down directly. Too much exposure. Marjorie scanned the schematics, then pointed to a corner of the map. Bay 12C. Do we still have anything grounded there? He hesitated. An RQ-9 Reaper 2 actually, but they're decommissioned. She smiled just slightly. Then they won't be looking for them. Bay 12C hadn't seen light in years. The concrete smelled of oil and rust. Fluorescent bulbs flickered like dying stars overhead. 3 Reapers sat under tarps, one stripped for parts, one dormant, one almost operational. Marjorie moved like she belonged there. Because she did, she bypassed the standard terminal, opened the side panel on the drone's control unit. It was locked behind a passcode, one she hadn't used in 2 decades. She typed it in from memory. The panel lit green, unlocked behind her. Holbrook watched in silence. How do you still know that? I didn't forget, she said. Because I was the one who wrote the override protocol. The Reaper hummed softly as power surged through its veins. She bypassed the targeting queue, switched to manual optics, loaded an electromagnetic payload from the inventory. Old tech, illegal now, but perfect for what she needed. 17 seconds, she muttered. That's all we'll get. Once we trigger ascent, the rogue drone will climb. Try to transmit. Holbrook nodded. You sure this will work? No, she said, but I'm sure we won't get a second shot. She hit the ignition. The Reaper lifted smoothly, quiet, predatory. It moved through the low-altitude path like it still remembered how. Sensors aligned. Target locked. Across the field, the rogue drone jerked as if it sensed something it didn't expect. Its thrusters flared. It climbed fast. Too late. Marjorie's Reaper hit it mid-ascent. A burst of concentrated EM pulse surged forward. Clean, focused. No flames, just static. The foreign drone dropped like a stone, crashing beyond the perimeter. The data never made it out. Back in command, the map blinked. Threat neutralized. Base status green. Holbrook exhaled slowly. Said nothing. Just looked at her. She peeled off her gloves, dropped them into the waste bin, and walked away. That night Rostov was escorted to a black vehicle. No cuffs, no headlines, just a quiet exit under diplomatic cover. He requested transfer to a different NATO facility, cited logistical incompatibilities. No one argued, but his dossier was flagged and routed straight to Brussels. Inside the operations center, officers reviewed the incident. Most didn't even know who fired the shot or who gave the order. They just knew something had happened, and it had been stopped. Meanwhile, in a back hallway near the maintenance wing, Marjorie Lane stood at a rusted sink, washed her hands, slow, methodical. Her reflection in the mirror looked exactly the same. Same gray hair, same eyes, but the weight behind them had shifted. She dried her hands, turned off the light, and disappeared down the corridor just as she always had. The halls were quiet at 0530, half lit, half forgotten. A handful of officers, handpicked by General Holbrook himself, gathered in the underground vault beneath Operations Command. No phones were allowed, no recording devices, just sealed walls, brushed steel tables, and the low hum of servers behind the concrete. Marjorie Lane stood at the head of the room. Not in coveralls, not with a mop, but in a flight suit so black it caught no reflection. There were no insignias, no rank, just the presence of someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. She placed a slim folder on the table, opened it. Inside was a timeline, a pattern. Mistranslated phrases, cross-dialect confusion, strategically embedded linguistic shifts across briefings, intercepts, and command chains. Each error was small, individually harmless, but together they formed a net, a quiet breach in NATO's defense posture. They weren't trying to break in, she said softly. They were already in. They were just testing how far they could walk before anyone noticed. A young officer leaned forward. How did you spot it? We ran every document through the AI. She looked at him, not unkindly, because the AI doesn't listen to accents. Doesn't understand why a Chechen verb was used instead of a Muscovite one or why a Syrian colonel would phrase something like a man from Tehran. She paused. Language isn't just translation. It's fingerprint. And these prints didn't match the hands they came from. Around the room, faces shifted from confusion to unease, from skepticism to understanding. General Holbrook stood beside her now. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then he turned to the group. As of today, we are establishing a new unit, he said. Linguistic Threat Assessment Cell, Special Operations Language Monitoring, Strategic Level Review of Comms and Intercepts for Signs of Synthetic Manipulation or Human Compromise. He glanced back at Marjorie, and she's leading it. Someone in the back started to protest. A major with sharp shoulders and too much pride. No disrespect, sir, but she's not even in uniform. Holbrook didn't flinch. He simply opened a sealed file and began reading. Operation Phoenix Tide, Berlin 87-1 operative, 3 extractions, ceasefire negotiated under mortar fire using 6 languages in real time. He closed the file. Unless you can do that, Major, you'll address her as Commander Lane from now on. No one spoke again. That afternoon, Marjorie was issued a new badge. It shimmered silver and black. The words Linguistic Intel Restricted Access etched beneath the new insignia. A quill, a microphone crossed over an empty circle, the symbol of those who watch the space between words. Her new office was small, tucked in a corner of the West Wing, the same wing she'd once scrubbed twice a day. She kept it simple. 1 desk, 1 chair, a shortwave receiver on the shelf, and the wooden box beneath the drawer. Not for nostalgia, but to remind her what had been lost and what must never be again. By the end of the week, she'd assembled her team, no more than 5 analysts, fluent in over 20 dialects combined, each one hand-selected by her. Each one trained not just to read, but to listen. The base didn't hold a ceremony. There was no announcement. No photo on the bulletin board. But word spread among the staff. Whispers began to shift. She used to be a janitor. No, she was deep black. Like agency-level black. I heard she once ended a war by correcting a preposition. Marjorie ignored it. She walked the same halls, same posture, same quiet steps. But now when she passed, people moved aside, not out of fear, but respect. In the cafeteria, a lieutenant she'd once corrected in Turkish offered her a seat. She declined with a nod, then sat alone, not because she wanted to be distant, but because the work was never over. Even in silence, it spoke, and she listened. One evening, a young linguist from her new team approached her. "Ma'am," he said, "if you don't mind me asking, why come back now after all these years?" She looked out the window. The sky was violet. The flag barely moved. "Because I heard the wrong voice in the wrong hallway," she replied. "And when you've spent your life listening, you know when the silence turns cold." He didn't speak again, just nodded, then left her alone with the dusk. At shift change the next morning, the janitorial team gathered outside the maintenance locker. They waited for her out of habit, but she didn't come. Instead, she passed by them wearing a black flight suit, no mop, no gloves, only the badge and the insignia, and a face they all now recognized. One by one, they stepped aside. Not because they were told to, but because they understood. Some heroes don't stand on platforms. They walk the halls, listening, watching, waiting for the wrong sentence to find the right set of ears. And when it does, they don't raise their voice. They raise the alarm and keep the rest of us safe without ever saying their own name. That day in Travis Air Force Base, the woman once called Mop Ghost walked with quiet dignity through the very corridors where she had once been invisible. No one clapped, no one saluted, but everyone turned. And in the stillness of their respect, she said everything she ever needed. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.